Raiders Zone Weekly with Steve Kandray, Vince Calautti, Billy Hassinger, and Jesse Meade. Good evening. This is Raiders Zone Weekly. I am Billy Hassinger, Vince Calautti, and Steve Kandray here with me. Jesse, down in Columbus tonight, interviewing for a job. Hopefully he gets it.
Good luck, Jesse.
Maybe we'll have one more show this semester where we can all be here at one time.
I'm sure we will. As Steve was not with us last week, we'll keep that story personal, though, unless he does feel like sharing it real quick. But like we said, this is Raiders Zone Weekly. We thank you for joining us. Our first topic tonight is World Series is underway. St. Louis able to get a victory last night in Game 1. What's it look like so far for you guys?
You know, it is actually kind of interesting to see these two teams. It's really hard to get back to a championship game in any sport, regardless. Baseball, the only ones who ever seem to be able to get back always seems to be the Yankees. So to see another team do it again, which is kind of nice. So the Rangers coming back, and then you've always got the Cardinals with great history. It's a good matchup because, again, you got a wild card team that's coming in, basically running what the Green Bay Packers were with a hot team coming in. So they're going off against a perennial, it's starting to become a perennial power in the AFC, in the American League.
Yes, in the AFC North, as the Texas Rangers playing. No, it's kind of funny because in the agenda it actually said, in parentheses, Steve, shut up, because obviously I always come on here and say how I don't follow baseball. I actually did some research on this a little bit, but it was only regarding television ratings, and people watched Game 7. I know it's a groundbreaking news. People watch Game 7 like exponentially more than any other game. So I will watch this if it does go to a Game 7, but if not, I'm probably really not going to care. But like Vince said, it's nice to see two teams that aren't always in the limelight get in there. I mean, Texas made it back twice in a row, which is kind of refreshing since it isn't the Yankees, the Red Sox making it twice in a row. It's always nice to see another team out of there. St. Louis, same story. I mean, they've been a historically good team, but it's not like they're the Yankees, the Red Sox, or just some hot team. So good to see some fresh faces in there, I guess, and that's all I have to say about baseball.
I was kind of surprised to see Texas make it back. I thought that Detroit was definitely going to be able to handle them in the ALCS with Verlander, Porcello, Fisher, and Scherzer. The pitching staff is there for both teams, but the offense just got shut down for Detroit. So Texas with Andrews, Nelson Cruz, and Josh Hamilton just able to take it to Texas in the ALCS.
Well, the biggest issue for Texas right now in this World Series, Josh Hamilton has an injured groin, and none of the Texas Stars have gone past 6 innings, so that's going to pose a problem against this Cardinals lineup if they can't go into the deeper regions, deeper into the games. That's going to be a problem.
Nope, I didn't come up with anything new to talk about in between that little span. So I guess Vince or Billy, back to you.
Definitely.
I'll just state why I don't like baseball. Number 1, it's slow. Number 2, it's slow and boring. They take like 30 seconds in between every pitch.
Wait, point 1 and point 2 are essentially the same thing.
Yes,
Continue.
They are the same thing, exactly. Point 3 is it's slow and boring. I just can't, for some reason I can watch golf, but I just can't watch baseball. I cannot get into it. So I apologize since we don't have Jesse here to fill the void that I am leaving since I have a lack of baseball knowledge. But
that just makes no sense. You can watch golf, but you can't watch baseball.
Golf, it relaxes me. They play that nice music. They show the overview of the course. I just kind of sit back, let my mind.
Trust me, golf is anything but relaxing.
Yeah.
As moving on, we're going to talk about the NBA now, and the question here tonight is, why did the NBA wait until the cancellation of the first 2 weeks of the season to finally have a negotiation session, and it lasted 16 hours? What are they thinking right now?
Now, to clarify, was this their only negotiation session so far? Because from my understanding, it was the first marathon session.
They've had negotiation sessions before. They've had extended ones before. This is the first one with a federal mediator involved when they're starting to get serious. Same guy who mediated the NFL lockout.
I think it had less to do with the timing of the cancellation. I don't think they got to cancellation and said, oh, maybe we should have a marathon session. I think it was kind of in the works, but they got to a point where they needed to cancel the first 2 weeks, and it just sort of happened to be the time when they would have this marathon mediation session. But something else I was looking at is one of the agreements that both sides are looking towards is this 50-50 agreement. What is wrong with 50-50? Why can't people agree on that? I mean, obviously the players are the ones who actually do the playing and provide the sport, but the owners, they work and they build that infrastructure that these players need to make the millions of dollars they have every single year. I mean, without that, without your arena, without the coaching staff, without the recruiters, without everything that goes into it, the players cannot have this luxurious lifestyle and luxurious area to play. So it just seems I don't understand why both sides can't accept 50-50. It seems a little redundant not to be acceptable with that.
I've been reading Bill Simmons on ESPN.com. He is a huge NBA guy. He's been following the NBA, and there's a few theories behind that. One is that the owners can't help themselves when they give big contracts over to players, so they want more of that revenue so they can protect themselves as part of it. And there's some other issues. The players want more. Basically, the players want to keep the amount of money that they have at the time. They want to get a little more because they want to be able to protect themselves as well when if they get injured and stuff. Players are always looking for that future bargain. The biggest issue here with this 16-hour marathon is the fact that, according to Simmons, and I tend to agree with him on this, is that these guys, I think they expected once they canceled it the first 2 weeks that everyone would be in an uproar. There has generally been no uproar whatsoever. Everyone's got football now. We've got the baseball World Series. We've got all this stuff coming up. Hockey's starting to come up again. The diehards are going to go to that and different things. So there's really if you think about it, there's no basketball diehard because we got our football back, and that's really what this country really wants is football. So we've got that, and that I think this kind of set them in a panic mode and said, okay, we seriously need to sit down and do this, and that's why they tried to stretch us out when they should have done this before.
I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense, Vince. Just the fact that they really expected the first 2 weeks to cause some sort of a tension. Something would break. You'd think the one side would feel the pressure, like the owners would feel the pressure from fans. The players would feel the pressure of the fact that there's no season, that they're missing paychecks now. But you're right. People got football to watch, baseball to watch right now, and hockey. So it'll be a long time till they feel the pressure.
College basketball too.
Quite frankly, for me, I was just glad that we got football back. I'd gone nuts if I didn't have my football to watch on Sunday afternoons.
He's one of the examples.
Undivided.
It is our first 5 undivided topic of the night, and the ghost of Al Davis strikes again as the Raiders give up a first-rounder for the 2012 draft, a conditional second-round pick, which could turn into a first-round pick in 2013, which means that the Oakland Raiders do not have a first-round pick until 2016, and this year they don't have a single pick until the 5th round, I think it is.
Well,
and just to go to show how much Carson Palmer wanted out of Cincinnati, he took a $5 million pay cut to go play for Oakland.
Yeah, this is a huge thing right now. 31 years old. He hasn't been really the same since that elbow injury in 2008. He had a lot of interceptions in 2010, but he's still an upgrade over whoever they have on the roster right now. You got to look at this. You got to wonder if Hugh Jackman got possessed by Al Davis after he died. Just be like, we're going to swing this trade. Big arm quarterback, throw the ball down the field, And he's one of those, he's right in the mold of what an Al Davis trade would be. And the other thing to keep in mind, though, for next year is that they're going to get compensatory picks. So they could have a pick as high as the 3rd round. But you're right, they are our first-round picks for a while, but they've really done well building up in the later rounds, getting those types of draft picks. So I'm not that concerned about it, but I think this is a good move for Oakland to get this guy, at least for right now. You got a guy who's got a few years left on his contract. He's still got lesser talent now, still has some great talent to throw the ball down the field. I think it's a good trade.
So, Billy, did you or Jesse come up with the title for this story? Because I was looking at it and I was like, really? You pull out the ghost of Al Davis for the title? I'm like, really? You guys went there?
It was Jesse.
Of course it was Jesse. If Jesse was here, he would have given me.
He had that done before I even got there.
Yeah, I'm sure. But Vince, I have to completely agree with you, or disagree with you. I'm sorry, that would be weird if we agreed on 2 stories in a row.
Yeah, really.
But I really don't see the logic behind going after a quarterback. I understand that you got to fill your void here. Are they going to win the Super Bowl this year?
I don't believe so.
Are they going to make the playoffs?
They believe they're going to make the playoffs. That's why they made this trade.
It just seems like you already gave up your 3rd-round pick for Terrell Pryor. Maybe still in development process right now. We don't know what's going to be. We don't know if he's going to be good. Like, he's such a high-risk pick, so they give up their 3rd-round pick for that. Then they give up a 1st-round pick, a 2nd-round pick, maybe, which could turn into a 1st-round pick. Is Carson Palmer worth 2 1st-round picks? I mean, why don't they just invest their 1st-round pick in a good quarterback and maybe make a trade next year for someone who's somewhat good? It's not like Carson Palmer was Tom Brady. It's not like they're bringing in some super awesome guy. I mean, his quarterback rating has gone down every year since, I think, after he had the season where he was like a 91.1 quarterback rating. And at one point it went down to 69, and then it jumped back up to like in the 80s. Right now he's at the level of Donovan McNabb. I mean, would you give up 2 first-round picks to get Donovan McNabb?
I think he's a little more than Donovan McNabb. You saw last year.
His passer rating's the same.
But even with that bad year, he still is able. Last year, he was still able to lead that team down the field. He had some good drives against good teams. He's not. And he's going to have a decent line around him. It should be interesting to see how he plays now with a decent line with guys who can run down the field. Those types of players who some people thought last year some of his wide receivers didn't try hard enough to get to the ball when they should have been there, and that's what caused some interceptions. So.
I think that I'm not trying to disagree and say he's a bad quarterback, because he isn't a bad quarterback. He just isn't a great quarterback. He's a good quarterback. He's just sort of in that middle. He's not. It's just he's past his prime. He's only going to get worse from here on out. He's not going to vastly improve. He's 31, and it's not like he's had some upward trend. I mean, maybe for some reason the Raiders system will give him some boost in the season, but it just seems like if you're going to make these kind of investments with your team, you're really giving up. It just seems very short-sighted to go put all this stuff into this one season when you're not even going to...
Again, remember, they also have done really well in their late-round draft picks, getting certain people, so that's something to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, but the problem is, though, with late-round picks, you never know if they're actually going to pan out and be good, come in and be good and be a sleeper or not. But I tend to agree with Steve more on this, just for the fact that this next year, there's a number of good quarterbacks that are going to be in the draft. You got Landry Jones, who's going to most likely come out. Kellen Moore is graduating. There's Andrew Luck, who knows what's going on with him. If he comes out, you know he's going to be the number one, so he won't be there. But you look at the quarterback class for next year, there's going to be players there. Russell Wilson's graduating again, is going to be done at Wisconsin, and we've seen what he's been able to do at NC State. Who knows, maybe even Steven Garcia might get drafted despite the fact of all of his problems. But nonetheless, so there are going to be some good quarterbacks in this next year's draft. So I would agree, say, take the younger guy, someone that you know that's going to be around for a while.
How happy are the Bengals, though? I mean, that's a great trade for them overall anyways.
Moving on to college basketball now, Bob Knight is accused of making illegal recruiting calls in favor of his son, Pat Knight, who is the coach at Lamar, when there are people saying that it took 15, 20-minute calls, and Pat says that all he did was say hello to them on the phone.
I read into the story a little bit, into the transcript of what Bob Knight said he said, and it was definitely a little more than hello. He basically said, hey, you'd be good for this program, you're probably a good fit here. If a recruit hears that from Bob Knight, from a coaching legend, of course he's going to be influenced by that, and that's just unfair to other schools. I mean, there are some pretty strict NCAA regulations about your notable alumni. You can have them on campus. You're not supposed to have them specifically influence your notable alumni. I mean, think about it, if Ohio State had Archie Griffin talk to every person, call them up personally, and say they were a good fit for Coach Fickell's program. I mean, it would sway things so much. So I think it's really, I don't understand the thinking with Bob Knight on this. Maybe because he just thought it was his son, he kind of thought it was okay. But on the other side, I've almost become numb to all these recruitment violations. Like we hear about one, every other month or week. There's always something going on. So I think the NCAA needs to come down with harsher penalties or something, or these programs need to fix it up, or just go the other way and just eliminate the violations, because it's just
it's frustrating.
So I'm going to end that sentence.
It's frustrating because you don't know, and then the NCAA will, one case that it will just get off very slightly, on another case that looks completely similar, give them a harsher penalty. So I would want to say that Bob Knight didn't know what he was doing, but at the same time, it's Bob Knight. I mean, number one in coaching victories for men. I'm pretty sure he knows what he's doing.
He isn't a dumb guy.
No.
He had to recruit for years and
years.
Just
a fiery guy.
He's a fiery guy. I loved when he threw the chair across the floor. That was awesome.
Speaking of chairs, you gotta wonder if a recruit said that he wasn't going to Indiana, does he start throwing chairs at him?
That's why the chairs are bolted to the floor now. And actually, in the NCAA, the chairs are bolted to the floor because he threw one across the floor. But you can't really expect this, that he didn't know what he didn't know or anything. I'm gonna go with that. He knew what he was doing. He just went a little too far, and they'll probably give a small slap on the wrist unless somehow Pat Knight says that his dad is actually on his coaching staff.
And you see, that's going to be the thing. What happens? Doesn't Pat come out and say that Bob is like a recruiting advisor for Lamar now, or is he just someone that just happened to say hi to him?
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like they're doing this under the table. I mean, if he's a coaching advisor, he's being paid by the university, that you would know. It's not like he can just sort of be like, oh, he's also a coach. There has to be some sort of formality to it.
Yeah, but the violation that they're possibly saying is the fact that he's not employed by the university at all. If he's not getting paid, it's illegal recruiting. So
right.
And one thing you gotta give props to the NCAA is he's probably one of the most well-known coaches in the history of the NCAA basketball, and they might actually call him out on something and lay down some violations.
We'll see.
So.
And you gotta wonder too. Like, he never. This is also kind of out of character for him. I don't believe he's ever had any sort of violation in his programs before this. So,
just have to wait and see exactly what goes on with Lamar and what sanctions possibly come down. Moving on back to college football, or I guess our first college football topic of the night. Just had football on the brain there. LSU suspends star defensive back Tyrann Mathieu for their game this weekend against Auburn. Running back Spencer Ware, who is their leading rusher, and cornerback Tharad Simon, who is 4th on the team in tackles, I believe, have all been suspended for this game. Just a crazy turn of events this week.
This hurts. This is especially Tharald Simon, and you and I were talking about this earlier. At least Les Miles, good for him having the ability. You never worry about him not wanting to suspend a player. He will suspend players when something happens. Same thing with Bob Stoops in Oklahoma. They got no problem. Got rid of Rhett Bomar after his incidents. But Tharald Simon is going to be their biggest loss here. They always thought what was going to happen after Peterson left, and Tharald Simon has stepped in. I believe he's has the most fumble returns in LSU history or on the team. He's leading it in something like that, and that's a huge blow to him because he was their shutdown corner. Teams can start picking them apart now. I think the offense won't be as bad because they can still do their pass and stuff, but particularly Tyrann Mathieu on the defensive line. But most importantly, quarterback Tharald Simon's going to hurt them.
How long are they up for?
I believe just this week.
Just
tonight, this week?
Yeah.
Okay.
This week.
Because what I was going to say, if they were out for any longer than that, this would definitely just shake up college football landscape. Because, I mean, LSU, the way they've been playing this year, pretty clear number one in the polls and just, a powerhouse, especially because, we all love the SEC over here. We always talk about how great they are. So, LSU, something that Vince said was talking about how unafraid Les Miles was. And that really is something to talk about, coaches' integrity. I mean, when you're LSU, it's not like you're LSU on an off season. You can, whatever, we're just playing a rinky-dink team and we can do this. I mean, you're coming into this as the number one team in the nation with a legitimate shot to stay there and win a national title, and he's pretty much putting that all on the line just for the sake of integrity. He's not saying, well, we're going to wait and maybe suspend you at some other time. I mean, he just put it right up front. So I say this could almost be a cheer of the week for Les Miles. I mean, that's impressive. You really don't see this in college football as much anymore.
It really is, because, and Tyrann Mathieu, he's probably going to be one of the top picks in the NFL draft this next year. There's a lot of comparisons between him and Patrick Peterson, and Mathieu actually changed his number to 7 this year because he's saying it's like, Peterson wore number 7, I'm going to show that I am better than Peterson. He's got 9 forced fumbles on the season. He's just having a great year, and some people have them high up on their Heisman Trophy list too, which is very difficult to be as a defensive back. But you look at the way he's impacted games this year, he changed the landscape of that Oregon game. He was able to force a fumble on D'Anthony Thomas and get returned for a touchdown, which helped LSU onto a victory. But either way, you're losing your top 2 defensive backs right now. You're losing your leading rusher. And Miles is just not taking any crap from these guys, so you got to give him a lot of props for it. But Mathieu, and what they guys suspended for, synthetic marijuana. Come on. Come on, guys.
Really?
It's just like, why would you be so stupid? And Miles, like you said, Steve, putting on their number 1 ranking on the line this week against Auburn, and Auburn's a team that could actually knock them off.
Particularly when you're talking synthetic marijuana drugs. Steven Garcia, big national, 5 times suspended because of drugs. You would think that you would want to pay attention to these things and try and lie low from that.
Moving on to our cheers of the week now, the NFC West finally has a team that could win in another conference, as they are better than the AFC South right now, with San Francisco leading at 5-1, and Tennessee leads the AFC South at 3-2, I believe, is their record.
Wow. Okay, NFC West. Props to you. It's weird. I think it's kind of weird that we're not talking about the AFC North, because I feel like the last few shows we've been like, oh, AFC North, who's going to win? It's all whatever. But well, good for the NFC West. Don't have a whole lot else to say about that. I'm sure Vince has some in-depth report, though.
The interesting thing about this is when you talk about the Colts and you talk about the AFC South, it's always been Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning's had that ability to make this happen and make that Colts team up there, perennial contenders. I believe it's 12 straight years that they've had 10 wins or more, or 12 wins or more, which is really impressive. And now when they've fallen apart, everybody's trying to jump up there, and they just don't have the ability. The Tennessee Titans, who are we're supposed to have the top rushing, I believe, are 31st or 32nd in rushing offense. And then you look over here at the NFC West. They always make jokes on NFL Live, call it westbound and down, making fun of how bad everything is. But you really look at it, and you've got like you talk about the 49ers, 5-1, really pushing up. Did a great job against Detroit this past Sunday, and I think they're really a good team, a team to look out for in this conference.
I think that the 49ers is a team that we talked about last week. That they are a legit playoff contender this year. We saw them in the one game against the Dallas Cowboys. They took the Cowboys right down to the wire. Actually had that game won before Tony Romo decides to come back with a fractured rib and just one good lung and decides to play lights out and actually lead the team back to a victory. But San Francisco was one of those teams that they could legitimately be undefeated this year, and they handed Detroit their only loss, and Detroit has been a tough team. They were able to shut down Calvin Johnson.
I find it interesting that in this point in the season we're talking about, well, Detroit's a pretty tough team this year. I mean, that's just, good for Detroit that we're even talking about them at this point, but also good for San Francisco. I mean, the NFL, we talked about parity in the AFC North. I mean, parity in the NFL seems to be a recurring trend over the last few seasons and years. So it's good to see these teams that haven't been up in the limelight now having a chance, so hopefully they'll take advantage of it.
How about Harbaugh being one of the few college coaches that actually jumps up and does well in the NFL? I think his previous NFL experience helps him out with that, being in the NFL for a while, coaching in the NFL previously before going over to Stanford. He coached with the Raiders, so I think that's something to look at. But you got to look at San Francisco as well. How many first-round picks do they have on that team, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, which is his specialty?
They got a bunch of them.
It's like the entire offensive line, plus a quarterback, plus a tight end, wide receiver that they've acquired. They didn't draft themselves. So it feels like the entire offense is all first-round picks, and you'd have to think that would produce at some point.
The opposite of Oakland's entire team, which will be all be eighth-round picks in a couple years.
Oh, if only there was an eighth round. I'm sure we would see Oakland have about 5 of them each year. But moving on to our Jeers of the Week, sticking out in the NFC West, we're talking about the San Francisco 49ers and the Detroit Lions. As if you didn't see it, after the game, Jim Harbaugh, all fired up like we see him quite a bit, goes up, shakes the hand of Jim Schwartz, and then Schwartz takes offense to the way that Harbaugh shook his hand, chases him down, and we almost saw a fight between the coaches. The players actually had to break him up.
Oh, that was just so funny.
I don't know what Coach Schwartz really thought he was going to do. Okay. I mean, was he going to actually start a fight with Harbaugh?
He said what he wanted to do is he was going to go up and tell him basically, hey, he thought he got shoved. He was going to go up and sit and try and talk to him about it. He pushed him to get his attention and everything. But what happened? You said Harbaugh jumping up and down. He ran forward, grabbed Schwartz's hand, and at the end slaps him on the back shoulder in the greeting, and it looked like apparently Schwartz felt he got pushed. This is coming from another guy who's fist pumping on the sideline during games. So both men are emotional guys who get really fired up, and then we see Schwartz chasing down Harbaugh. I thought it was hilarious, and I really think that Harbaugh was actually kind of making fun of him, going, "It's my bad. I shook his hand too hard. I thought it was funny, personally.
It was funny in a way. In another way, it was kind of sad that our professional NFL coaches can't have a little bit more professionalism. I mean, I was just kind of thinking back to Tom Landry of the Cowboys with his hat and wear a suit and being completely professional, and Vince Lombardi and great coaches. It just Harbaugh's got a lot of emotion, but if you're a professional organization's coach in the NFL, you really need to have a little bit more professionalism about you and just contain your emotions. Go over, shake the other coach's hand, walk to your locker room. Then you can get your team revved up. But you just don't bring that. I mean, you're not the quarterback of your high school state championship team, and that's what he looked like. He ran off and he got all excited. But I think Schwartz took a little bit too much offense. He didn't really push him. It was more just kind of a pat on the back. But I also kind of feel weird that Harbaugh didn't acknowledge that, and he just said, "Oh, I shook his hand too hard." He's sort of just being maybe a little facetious about it. He's not really admitting that
he's had altercations before with other coaches. So
yeah, I mean, it's just his personality. But regardless, I think that you're representing your organization. You just need to be a little more classy about it.
Yeah, and talking about Harbaugh with other incidents with coaches. Remember back to the game when he was at Stanford. They're playing USC. He goes for 2 after a touchdown when they were up by a lot, and then Pete Carroll says to him after the game, "What was that about?" And the first thought I had after that was come on, Carroll. You keep your first stringer in there. You throw the ball down the field when you're up by 50. I don't want to hear about
Carroll would have done the
same
thing.
It's don't be getting mad at another coach for stuff that you have done in the past. But I think that was funny how Harbaugh reacted to it and everything. But at the same time, I can understand that Harbaugh was just fired up because they just knocked off the Lions, gave him their first loss of the season. He's done a great job turning the 49ers around, and I can understand where they're both coming from, but at the same time, they do have to keep the professionalism on the field. And so we jeer you, handshakers, from the game between the Lions and the 49ers this last weekend. As now we move on to our next topic of the evening, which is a Undivided. This one hits a little bit heavier than most of our 5 Undivided topics, as if you didn't catch it this last weekend during the final race of the IndyCar season, there's a horrific 15-car accident and a number of cars got sent into the catch fence, and sadly enough, Indy 500 winner from this year, Dan Weldon, was passed away after suffering some very severe injuries. So it just goes to show that no matter how safe they can actually try to make the sport of racing, whether it be NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, or anything, there's always that chance that something like this is going to happen.
I mean, I think that's all there is to say about it. I mean, just the fact that there isn't a whole lot you can do. You can only make it so safe when you've got 15 cars going around the track at 200, almost 200 miles per hour. I mean, I did hear some accusations that there were too many cars on the track, like they were above what they should have had. I'm not sure. Vince is shaking his head like he has insider knowledge on this.
No, just other stuff, but I'll wait until you're done.
Vince just had that look, like he's like, oh yes, I know the history of the stadium and why it's, But Vince always good for some stats. But it just. Like you said, there's only so much you can do. I mean, you try and make it. I mean, and people joke about, oh, they just want to see the crashes when they go. And I think a lot of fans in general of NASCAR aren't in it for that. It's just sort of a side effect. People say, oh, it's a spectacle. I mean, it's a legitimate sport. People aren't just there to watch the spectacle of crashes, and nobody likes it when there's a big crash, even when there is any crash, because there is that danger of injury or being killed or anything. So, it's just a really morbid thing. And like you said, there's only so much you can do to prevent that when you're racing cars around at 200 miles an hour.
Yeah. This is the third crash in car racing. 2001, you had Dale Earnhardt, which made huge rippling impacts across all sport type of racing. And then 2006, there was a fatality in the open car series. And now Dan Weldon, this year, Weldon was he was competing in this. A bunch of players were competing in this, or I believe there's a bunch of people competing in this event, and he was in it. If he had won the race, he would have won an extra cash prize for it. So some of these guys were just competing just for fun. That seemed what his was kind of like. And as they were going in, they're going around an oval track, which these cars are usually not built to do. And Jimmy Johnson, they asked him about it, and he said those cars, they get lift. And you can't control a car when it's in the air, and those cars are not made to go around in ovals. They're good for a road course. You're going 200 miles an hour around a turn. That's going to cause lift and flying, and that's what happened. One of the other guys hit the safety barrier that they've made along that fence, and he was lucky. He said he would have been dead too had he not hit that. But it's just a really sad day because we all knew Dan Weldon from winning the Indianapolis 500, because Indianapolis 500 is a big race, and people when they win those things. And he leaves behind a wife and 2 kids, and that's just. Again, it's gonna have major rippling effects across sports. Again, that's the second death in 5 years. That's pretty heavy on the heart.
And it's not just the fact that he won the Indy 500 this year for the second time. It was how he won it. The rookie came around the final turn, lost control of his car, slammed into the wall, but he still finished second. But Weldon passed him down the front stretch there, as it takes forever to get to down there. But like you said, Vince, there's been a couple other incidents in IndyCar. Earnhardt back in 2001. Adam Petty and Kenny Irwin crashed at New Hampshire during practice runs and were killed, unfortunately. And, in NASCAR, they've had the Hans device for the head and neck that keeps you pretty much stable. But like we said, there's only so much you can do. And IndyCar definitely lost a great driver at the age of 33 in Dan Weldon.
Yeah, he was going to be, if you look at it, all the other Indy drivers that have jumped up, Juan Pablo Montoya, Frank Hitty, those guys jumping up, you're going to have, Weldon was in prime position to be the face of the IndyCar series for a long time.
And there is a lot to be said about the technology that goes into these cars. I mean, they have made great leaps and strides. I mean, basically, it's like its own little cockpit inside there that almost detaches from the car when you get in a crash. So it is amazing. I mean, we're not saying that they're just throwing guys out there and they're not doing anything to prevent, but
exactly.
There isn't only so much you can do. I think it brings up an interesting issue, too, as to, do you just sort of leave it at? Do you need to make sweeping changes, or do you just leave it as it is and just say, well, that's a part of the sport. There's always that risk, or do you just completely change everything to try and make it safer?
And something else that people don't realize, they say, yeah, all the people to get people to races just drive around in circles. It's so much more than that, because you got to be able to have focus to go that many times around in a car, especially when you're going 180, 200 miles an hour with someone literally 6 inches from you. You got to have the focus, and you got to have good stamina to do that. Although people say that it's just so easy. It's just one of those things that it's a lot tougher than you think. And these drivers, they get a lot of stress put on them for each and every race. Moving on now, as once again, the Madden curse has hit the cover boy, as Peyton Hillis, nursing a hamstring injury, not having a good season. And his agent actually coming out and saying that it's the contract talks that are causing him some mental disruption, but It's nothing. It has nothing to do with the contract. It's the Madden curse. Are you a believer?
I'm not a full believer yet. I'm gonna wait until we either trade Hillis and something bad happens, or Hillis is out for the rest of the season because his leg falls off. But I think a lot of the issue has to stem from when he got that strep throat and he came out. He is worried about the contract and stuff, but I'm pretty sure that he can push that aside during game time. And it's just the fact that you're in an offense where the coach is trying to get as many passes in for I don't understand why, and you're trying to run the ball. Not Madden curse yet though, just a lot of other factors that are playing in.
Well, it isn't a very well-run organization. I mean, it's the Cleveland Browns.
It's getting there.
It's getting
not,
there. It's
getting
that was
there.
just a jab at you guys.
Coming from the guy who has a player on his team who's starting to retire because he's getting fined so much.
Yeah.
You know what? We got more rings than you. That's all I have to say.
Hey, who cares about the rings?
Yeah.
Everyone cares. That's what it's all about, is winning the Super Bowl. Anyway, this is completely off topic. Getting back to the story. As far as the Madden curse goes, I think it's kind of silly to look at it and, say a curse. I mean, it is really, really hard to have 2 outstanding seasons in a row. Every single player, compared to what they did the previous season, is never going to live up to that. I mean, you put somebody on the cover, they're not going to have an outstanding season again. You can look at Michael Vick back in 2007 when he was on the cover. I think he went to jail after that. I don't know if that really counts or not.
Michael Vick was on the cover in 2003.
Yeah, he injured himself.
2003?
Yeah.
Was he
2004,
out?
2004.
Oh, 2004. Okay, that's what I meant.
And he broke his leg in the preseason.
It's either...
Okay, fair enough. That was kind of a fluke. But I'm just saying, I mean, even anybody that you put up there, it doesn't matter how good they are, they're never going to live up to this. So even if you have an outstanding season and you're the cover of Madden, you're never going to have a great outstanding season the year after. It's just statistically...
Barry Sanders retired after he was placed on the Madden cover.
Yeah, he gets placed in the background of the Madden cover the night before training camp opens. I retire.
He's afraid. He can feel the...
Wanted to go out on top. Fair enough.
But yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of... While there seem to be some cases where I believe there's mounting pressure for it, and that kind of leads to it, plus a lot of injuries after you get placed on the cover, which is kind of odd.
There's mounting pressure anytime you have a good season.
Agreed. But injuries right after being placed on the cover is kind of weird, and it seemed to be happening to a lot of those people after they got placed on the cover.
Yeah, there's only been a couple players that really haven't gotten injured. Ray Lewis is one of them. He had a couple little nagging injuries, but he was able to play all but like one game that season. Drew Brees last year was able to play the entire season, had a great season despite the fact he threw a career high in interceptions. And then in the wild card playoff game, they lost to the only team to ever make the playoffs that had not had a winning record. So you look at it, a lot of things going wrong for players on the cover of Madden.
I mean, it's a legitimate trend. I just think if you look at the overall broad scope of players, they always have ups and downs.
I'm intending to agree with that a little more.
Just have to wait and see what happens the rest of the season. Will Hillis finally emerge as
no, probably not.
Man, such a hater.
Yeah, I know.
Moving on to our next topic of the night, the Big East decides to up its withdrawal fee to $10 million from $5 million to prevent other schools from leaving and to help it reach 12 football teams, as we saw Pitt and Syracuse decide to leave the Big East for the ACC. TCU decides to leave the Big East before they even get there for conference play and stay in the Big 12. And now they've extended offers to Army, Navy, Air Force, Boise State. Pretty soon it'll probably be Hawaii.
Yep,
that
Hawaii,
they invite.
2016, man.
But nonetheless, though, how will this affect teams that might come into the Big East but then decide that they want to, but have the possibility of joining another conference?
I think hopefully it'll have a positive impact on them. I'm just a little bit boggled at how you can just change your withdrawal fee. I mean, didn't all the teams get together and be like, all right, you've joined the Big East, this is the withdrawal fee? I mean, how can you just be like, well, now it's $10 million? Like, it seems weird. I mean, unless they all came together.
The commissioner has a choice in that, I believe.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But I think it's going to positively influence them. I mean, that does add a little bit of security. But we have seen teams, who was it? TCU left before they even entered. They really weren't too upset about paying the fee. So, I mean, if schools weigh the investment, if they're saying, well, I can go to the SEC and make $20 million over the course of 2 years, I'm really not going to care that much about the $10 million fee. I mean, it did double it. It is a pretty significant chunk of change. But if they look down the line and think they can make more money somewhere else, then they're still going to leave. But I think this will have overall positive impact on the Big East.
I think this is hilarious for the simple fact that we're talking about Big East football, which has been terrible. You know, if this was, I would be more inclined to believe this was about Big East basketball, where you're talking about that, which is Big East basketball's perennial power.
There's like 30 teams in the Big East basketball.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, if you're going to do that, I'd be more inclined to think about this, but this just makes me laugh. Again, Big East football has not been good for however many years, and I'm pretty sure teams will be glad to pay that $10 million or whatever just to get out.
Yeah, and I'm sure, and you almost got to think that Army, Navy, Air Force, and Boise, I don't think there's any way that they're going to the Big East. They know that they would just. I think Navy could go into the Big East next season and have a legitimate chance.
Unless they make like a Big East TV network. I mean, that seems to be the thing. If they form some Big East TV, if anyone cares to watch Big East football that much, then
for basketball.
I know I'm not necessarily a big fan of Big East football.
It's hockey time.
And unfortunately, Jesse is not here to hear the air horn.
I thought you were going to lead. It's like, I'm not necessarily a big fan of Big East football. I'll play that bit, but I am a fan of hockey.
Yeah, you could have a really sweet
perfect segue into it.
Jesse would have made that
segue. Getting away from segues and all that. The Toronto Maple Leafs are 3-0-1. The New York Islanders are 3-1, and the Avalanche are 5-1, and the Dallas Stars are 4-1. Teams that we're used to seeing down at the bottom of the NHL actually having good seasons.
You know what? I'm just going to use the example. I'm going to cross-reference sports here and actually use a baseball reference. Whoa, I know, right? Everybody's giving me weird looks. The Cleveland Indians and the Pittsburgh Pirates were leading their respective leagues at one point in the season. Didn't mean anything. Neither team made the playoffs. They all just faltered.
Yeah, but we all knew that Pittsburgh was going to flop. And, I'd say that throughout the entire season, it's like, I'm not buying it. If they're in first place when the last game of the season's played, then I'll be happy.
And that's how that's how I view this as far as hockey goes. There are so many games. I mean, it's really just about getting on who has more streaks. Whoever has the most winning streaks, whoever has the most losing streaks. If you can get on a good rhythm in January and February, that's the teams that are going to make it. I think the beginning of the season, a lot of teams are still trying to get in the swing of things. I mean, we have the Penguins who they still have Sidney Crosby out. They're going to try and work him back into games. I mean, I think
he's finally allowed to have contact, which is a good sign.
Right. I think that at this point in the season, it's really too early to really predict anything. I mean, if I'd say if the Bruins went 0-8, I really wouldn't be too fazed by it. I mean, there's just such a long way for hockey.
I'm looking at these. Some of these teams who've been, like you say, perennial downtrodden teams. This might be this beginning. This might be something that'll boost them up and actually give them a good season. Particularly, you got to look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. How bad have they been for how long? One of the teams that have had one of the storied franchise have a ton of championships, and then now all of a sudden they're good again. That's awesome. And I think it's something.
See, but don't make that generalization too fast. They've won 3 games.
It doesn't matter. It's something to build upon, and that means this is their fans are going to come back in droves. This could be the Maple Leafs could be one of those teams that I'm not saying they'll win a championship to get to the playoffs, but this could make a significant improvement, something to build on into the future. This is building block stuff. Also, as an aside, they had on ESPN.com hockey goalie helmets, which are really, really cool. They had, I was looking at, the one I looked at was the Anaheim Ducks one. They had like a full mallard all along the side and just different colors. It was pretty sweet.
That is pretty cool.
You got to check it out on ESPN.com.
I do enjoy, that's one of my pastimes, is looking at the different helmets. I remember Fleury, doesn't he have the moose?
Yeah, I think he's got the moose on there.
From the minor league hockey team he was on.
The one guy has a screaming face on his.
I think that was cool. Nikolai Habibulin.
Yeah.
That had the ridiculous face on his helmet.
Yeah, it's a screaming face. Looks like it's going to eat you. It's really cool.
And on that note, back to the NFL, as there are worries in the NFL that the Vikings are dangerously close to moving out of Minnesota. And how big of a negative could this be for the NFL if they do leave Minneapolis?
Jesse, if you're listening, you can call in, by the way.
This would be huge for a huge loss for the NFL. Again, this is one of the only a few teams to go to four Super Bowls and lose 4, but they've been to 4 Super Bowls. That's more than a bunch of other teams. There's only a few ahead of them in Steelers, Cowboys, Niners, and I believe the Patriots have been to more Super Bowls, and the Broncos have been to more or have had as many. Have been to more than the Vikings. So this is a really big franchise. It's one of those teams that really identifies with its city, like the Cleveland Browns. You saw what happened when they left when they left and moved out, how big of an impact that had on things shifting around. So I think that you'll have the same type of effect here. The city will end up keeping the team color, history, logos, and such. And they're going to wait a few years to bring a new team back in, but it's going to be. I think it'll be really negative again because people do not want to see what happened in Cleveland or Baltimore when they left for Indianapolis again.
I agree. I think there's a lot to be said for when you have a smaller city. It's not a major. It's not like New York where people can, obviously have two teams to pick from, or can become a little bit disconnected because it is such a large city. When you have, Minnesota, it's not a major city. It's not like, you have more of that sort of hometown feel. It's reminding me of Green Bay a little bit, although, I mean, obviously they're close, and, that's just a big rivalry. But they're one of these teams that, I don't know if I would say iconic, but they definitely have that historical value of the franchise. It's not like the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to move, or like, the Houston Texans are going to move. It does seem like one of those teams that has that historic connotation that really adds to the league. So it'd definitely be really sad to see them move.
If you think about it, they're one of the few teams that actually has the entire state cheering for them.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point.
Think about it. There's not too many. When you look around, there's not too many places that only have one state, one team in a state that people follow so devoutly.
To be fair, New England has an entire region of the country.
This is true. This is true.
Yeah, you got some of those places that have one team in the state. Colorado has the Broncos. Arizona has the Cardinals. You got the Seahawks up in Washington. Michigan, Chicago, Green Bay, and Wisconsin all have their teams. And so there really are quite a number of states that have only just one team. But Minnesota, all their fans are just so devoted, especially with the talk about them having an outdoor stadium. Mm-hmm. It's like, you've been in that dome for so long, you don't know what it's like to play in cold weather
That's
football.
The ultimate home field advantage for them. Really.
It'd be rough. It'd be bad. Nobody wants to see that happen. We all sound like Jesse here. I can't believe if he was here, he'd probably be extremely upset.
Is crying somewhere.
He might be.
5 Undivided.
As our third and final 5 Undivided topic of the night, talking about college football once again. As you all know, USC and Notre Dame play this weekend, and as a historical rivalry, as is Ohio State and Michigan. But both of those rivalries in recent years have become quite sad. Which one is the bigger sad rivalry today?
And as we all know, Billy will be wearing his USC colors this Saturday, cheering on the Trojans to defeat the Fighting Irish.
Want to bet? I'm not.
Wait a minute. Ohio State's won like 5 years in a row. I see nothing sad about that rivalry.
That's the thing.
Won a lot more than that.
It's not competitive anymore.
Good. That makes it better.
That's why it's sad.
Rivalry.
That is why it's sad.
I'm gonna go with the sad one. I'm gonna really more agree with Steve here. It's Notre Dame USC, and you got to look at it. You got to look at it from the historical context. These two teams are always supposed to be up in the top divisions. They're always supposed to be there, contending for something. USC is the class of the Pac-12, the class of the West Coast. And then you've got Notre Dame, who is basically America's team based on their historical value. They're not Billy's team, and you look at that, the hard times basically falling on Notre Dame for what I feel is they're falling behind recruitment. Plus you get all the recruiting violations at USC with things going on there, and their coach jumping ship. So I think that's sadder than Ohio State, Michigan. At least those games have been competitive and been in the national spotlight for certain things.
I was going to say, at least, Ohio State and Michigan, they were 1-2 at one point, not too long ago. I mean, that's really there's nothing sad about having a rivalry where it is competitive, even though Ohio State had superior players in coaching for a number of years. I mean, even look now, Ohio State out of the mix with Michigan's rise to prominence these last this year. They've been a lot better of a team, but USC and Notre Dame are just both kind of in sad states. I mean, Notre Dame's been a little bit better, but I don't see them doing too much. So I definitely say USC Notre Dame.
And you got to think last year was the first year Notre Dame has beaten USC since I believe it was 2001 when it was Pete Carroll's first season there. And they've had some good quarterbacks in that time too. They had
he's having a hard time thinking.
They've been all the notable quarterbacks.
I think his name was Carlisle Holiday. For some reason, that name is sticking. I forget his name. He was the quarterback before Brady Quinn. Then you had Quinn. Then Dane Christ come in. Jimmy Clausen. All these guys supposed to be top-notch quarterbacks. They couldn't beat USC though.
Yeah, Quinn would probably be the only one who you really would stand out as he was a good college quarterback. He set all the records at Notre Dame. So, I mean, it's something to look at. But again, you look at Ohio State, Michigan. Even before Tressel got there, you had the Cooper era where Ohio State was good but could not get over the hump of Michigan. Michigan was ridiculously good. So at least that has some sort of relevance coming in.
Tell you, it made me chuckle so much in Jim Tressel's second year at Ohio State when he matched John Cooper's win total against Michigan. When Cooper was there for like 14 years and he only won twice against them.
Part of me is still a little amazed that Tressel got fired since he beat Michigan so many times. Yeah. I feel like that had to have some clout. They had to be struggling a little bit. Man, this guy knows how to beat Michigan.
I think that's why they never fired him and he ended up resigning / retiring. Yeah. And I mean, you know a rivalry is good when he says, "I hope you'll like us in however many days when we beat Michigan," and then you knew that was. I mean, I'm sure other teams do it, but you never really hear about it unless it's on national news.
Unless you're Lane Kiffin and he's going into his first season at Tennessee, and he's like,
"We're gonna beat Florida,"
singing Rocky Top all night long after we beat Florida. But nonetheless, getting back to our two rivalries, really, quite frankly, I think that USC and Notre Dame is more sad just because Ohio State, even though they have been dominating, they only lost one time since 2001. 2000 was the last time they lost to Michigan before Tressel got there, and then they lost in 2003. The only time Tressel was unable to beat the Wolverines. They've been competitive games, with the exception of Terrell Pryor's freshman year, when they just absolutely slaughtered them. But that was when Michigan was in transition over to Rich Rodriguez.
Is that when they lost to not YSU, Appalachian State?
No, that was
Lloyd Carr's final year.
That was Lloyd Carr's final year. That was the year that they were ranked number 2 in the preseason, predicted to go on to possibly win a national title with Chad Henne, Mike Hart, Mario Manningham, Adrian Harrington. They had the stars, and then Appalachian State just comes out of nowhere. I remember I was at my family reunion that day, and then all of a sudden my buddy calls me and says, "Michigan lost." I'm like, "What?"
How many batteries does it take to shock Michigan?
I'm glad I had that. I'm glad I had that Freudian slip of YSU. I wish YSU could knock off.
That would have been amazing. Yeah.
I don't even know what I would do if YSU beat Michigan.
I'm pretty sure Steve and I would just be blowing up each other's cell phones. Like, did you just see what happened?
Yeah, I'm sure that you two would have a heyday if YSU were able
to. The Facebook site would have been jammed.
We would. Go Gwins.
Moving on to our next topic of the evening. It is D3 for 3 now, as Steve was not here last week to see the unveiling of our soundbite.
D3 for 3, that's the name you came up with?
That's what Jesse came up with. I had
all those good names. I mean, D3 for 3 is cool, but...
Don't look at me, but... Nonetheless, talking a little bit something about that's different than the OAC this week. This weekend, Wisconsin Oshkosh, who Mount Union played in the first week of the season, takes on the number 1 team in the nation, Wisconsin Whitewater. And what are the realistic chances that Oshkosh has this weekend? And what if Nate Wera doesn't play due to injury? And of course, we know Wera is the starting quarterback for the Titans.
I have a hunch about this. I feel as though Wisconsin Whitewater is very much due to lose since they've been so good. I mean, what they've won? They've been undefeated. What, 2 straight seasons in a row?
Yeah, they haven't lost since we beat them in the championship game 2 years ago, our freshman year.
Yeah, which would be 2009.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
8.
Anyway, 8. Either way, I was looking at the stats here. Interestingly to point out, Mount Union is beating Wisconsin Whitewater in pretty much every meaningful stat in the NCAA right now. Mount Union's number 1 in our total defense. We're like number 3 in rushing offense. Wisconsin Whitewater not quite up there. They're like 13, 8. They're hovering around the top, but they're not where we are. But that could mean 2 things. 1, Mount Union is the superior team this year. 2, the OAC is vastly not good. I was going to say vastly underrated, but that wouldn't really make any sense because we've got so many teams, which could be a possibility because the way we've seen, OAC teams knock off the number 2 contender like it's going out of style. I mean, it would not be that far out. So that's one thing to worry about. Either that or the WIAC is just so much better. But it's really interesting to look at that Mount Union does have so much better stats. The other thing to look at is that Wisconsin Oshkosh going into this game, both these teams have played Wisconsin Stout. And Wisconsin Oshkosh beat Stout by a bigger margin away than Whitewater did at home against Stout. And it was like 21 points versus 14 or something. So that's another thing to look at. So, I mean, I know it's a lot of extrapolation and a lot of looking at things, but I think it's a really realistic chance.
That would be so nice to see. I would love Oshkosh forever and a day if they won that, if they go and make that upset. But you got to look at, the key is going to be Wera. When he played against us in Mount Union, they ran that no huddle to perfection. You saw that first drive those first few drives, they were moving down that field. They scored on their second drive. Really frustrated the Mount Union defense until they picked it up. But he had that offense firing all cylinders. He's the key to that. If he's healthy and he can get going, then I think there's a good chance. But again, it's Wisconsin Whitewater. Every time we consider their starting quarterback out, every time we think they're out, they always manage to claw their way back. So it's going to be an interesting hope. I'm hoping that Oshkosh can pull it off.
Oshkosh is undefeated besides their week 1 loss to us. So they are pretty much on a roll. So they have a lot of momentum going into that game.
Let's go Oshkosh.
As moving on to our final topic of the night. And Jesse is right. That is one of our sound bites that will never get old at all. This past week, Jesse and myself were winners. As Jesse gets his second win of the season for the second time.
I had like 4 guys on the bench.
See what happens when you don't check your fantasy team.
I tend to forget that I have one. Like it's neat. I always get really excited about it during the draft, even though I missed the draft this year, which is because I was being a student first and a amateur host second. But at the same time, I just kind of always forget as the season goes on that I have a team and I don't remember to check it. So, like I said before, any win I get is gravy. Any loss I get, not really too upset about it. I didn't really pick this team. So, I got to work that comment in every single time like I did last week with my text. So there you go.
Oh, I am so ticked off at this game. I'm literally, I'm like 20 points behind, I think.
You're 22 points down.
22 points down, and I have Maurice Jones-Drew and Adrian Peterson.
Wow.
And I had Jones-Drew in. He didn't give me much.
Way to go completely wrong there.
Well, I had Matt Forte in, and I had Adrian Peterson in. I did have Maurice Jones-Drew in as well. He didn't do as well either. But I have those two in on Monday night coming in, and you think I could make up those points. Nope. I lose by 2 because Peterson only gets 9 points, 6 of those being a touchdown, and Forte had a chance to break up a huge one, and a defensive lineman dives forward and slaps his foot, making him fall over. I thought I was going to beat it because I thought I had Robbie Gould, and I realized I had Mason Crosby, and it was just it was just a frustrating night.
Question. This one is directed to everyone who actually runs fantasy football leagues, ESPN's website, Yahoo's website. Why don't they have an automatic function where if you play a player who's on the bench and someone else can play, they don't automatically sub it in?
Because
why is that not a feature?
Well, it's like the same thing if a coach puts in a player who's still injured or something. It doesn't. It shouldn't matter. That's still your decision because you're basically being the manager of your own team.
But there is no possible reason that if you had, we'll say healthy. Say you have a healthy player who isn't playing. You have a player who is on a bye week that week. I think the computer should automatically take your player who isn't playing and put him in the place. What possible reason could you have to play it?
You can't take 5 minutes out of your day, click on, switch, and get off.
Obviously, it means I forgot. I just think there should be a fail-safe where it automatically subs it in. Does that not make sense to anyone?
It's interesting.
No,
it's an interesting concept. I understand it.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, Steve, but
what if you're doing really good? Say you're going to win the championship. You forget 1 week that you had to switch your team around, and then you lose. Wouldn't you be like, oh, I wish I had an automatic thing?
No, I just would have been like, I wish I actually checked my team.
I guess that's fair enough. I guess it really only applies. The only demand for it is me because I often forget that I have a fantasy team to check.
Forgot it 2 weeks in a row, and you have lost 2 weeks in a row, my friend. Moving on, it is now pick time. Finally, as the show is starting to wind down. Makes me sad, though. I actually enjoy being on this side once again.
You love being the host. Makes you sad.
He's like, again, he's got a Brett Favre streak going here where he's determined not to miss a single high school game.
He does.
His career, he has it. He wants to be Brett Favre in this, and he's not going to retire. We may have to trade him away.
You're right.
And nonetheless,
getting back to our picks this week, our first pick of the night, number 25 was Washington. Yeah, it's kind of shocking to say that Washington's ranked without Locker there anymore.
Washington?
Taking on number 8, Stanford at Stanford.
Stanford, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that Stanford's going to come away on top there. Big Ten matchup this weekend. Number 6, Wisconsin, traveling to number 16, Michigan State.
Michigan State has been really tricky this year. They've been up and down, but they've been mostly good. However, I'm going to go with Wisconsin. I think overall better offense.
I agree, even though Wisconsin hasn't had any big-time opponents. I mean, they did play Nebraska, though.
They crushed Nebraska.
They really crushed Nebraska, who was pretty good. So I'm going to say Wisconsin. I think Michigan State's too. I mean, they lost to Michigan. No, they didn't play Michigan, right? Notre Dame.
They lost.
They beat Michigan, lost Notre Dame, which I thought was kind of weird. But maybe Notre Dame is better than I think.
I picked Wisconsin last year in this game. I'm not going that road again. I'm taking Michigan State. Last year I gave all these reasons why Wisconsin's going to win. It backfired on me. I'm taking Michigan State in this game. Give me another reason to hate Wisconsin. Yeah. Moving on, SEC this time around. Number 20 Auburn at number 1 LSU. We talked about earlier. Matthew, Simon, and Ware all out for the Tigers this weekend. Who comes out?
Even with all those things, even with all those people out, I still say LSU squeaks this out. I think the defense is stout enough to defeat Auburn.
I agree. I really don't see a situation in which LSU is going to lose unless Auburn just comes out. Because even with all those players gone, like you said, they just still are a complete team. I mean, they're not as good, but I don't think Auburn's good enough this year, even though they are a fellow SEC team, which puts them leaps and bounds above any other conference.
Makes them jump ahead,
There is that SEC bias.
Yes.
But they lost 2 weeks ago, didn't they? Didn't Auburn lose?
They did, but they didn't drop too much. They're number 20 now.
They're not going to make it number 1 like you think.
No, not now. Yeah, after that, no.
I'll take LSU as well. Even though they don't have Matthew and Simon, 2 top corners for them, they're deep. They have enough depth there. And Auburn, they just suck.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I like
Billy's.
Right. LSU, they're deep. They're deep. That's all. That's really all we need to say. It goes no further.
Yeah.
They're deep.
And that's right. I did say it. Auburn sucks this year. Moving on, NFL picks now. Chicago versus Tampa over in jolly old England.
I'm going to go with Tampa here. Chicago's not heading over until late in the week, and there seems to be a controversy brewing between Mike Marks and Jay Cutler.
I think the Bears are going to win just because I simply think they're a better team. Also, heard this today. Apparently, London is trying to get an NFL franchise, so maybe Minnesota will move to London and be the London Vikings or the London Bridges or something.
The London Tallywhackers.
Yes,
That is
I'm
the
sure
best
that's what
name.
I'm sure that's what they would go with
London
out of all their
Tallywhackers.
possible choices.
I'll take Tampa Bay. I'm not even getting started on that because I could go on for a while.
That
Why?
should
Because-
be a 5 undivided talk.
Right, because we're adding valuable information to the show. You're just gonna.
No, just because I could go on forever about something like that. And
Okay.
and we don't have time as
Fair
we
enough.
run out this week. Final football pick of the evening. San Diego at the New York Jets.
Give me San Diego. I think they, coming off their bye, I think they do well.
I think they're going to lose their momentum and get beat by the Jets.
I'll take the Jets as well. Historically, West Coast teams suck on the East Coast.
Huh. Good to know.
Yeah.
Except for when San Diego beats Pittsburgh in the play. Well, I guess Pittsburgh's not really East Coast; they're just easterly. But-
It's the Eastern time zone.
Fair enough.
The body clock. It's all messed up. Last pick of the evening. Who's the World Series winner?
I'll let Steve go first on this because he's such a big baseball fan.
I'm going to say Texas Rangers. I think they have a really good lineup, batting, really good pitching rotation. They got some good outfielders who can really play. They got a good shortstop. That guy's good. He can throw the ball well. Their catcher, all around a good guy. I think the Rangers are much better put together team.
How many games?
I don't 4.
Okay. That's not happening, but all
5
right.
games. I meant
There you
5.
go.
4 games.
You know, I think it's going to be really close. I think Texas does eke this out in 6 because I think, again, that offense is too deep, and once they get back home, I think they win all 3 of those, and I think they win all 3, and I think they can pull out victory at St. Louis somehow.
Yeah, I think that Texas is going to come away with this one. You know, Nelson Cruz, just a phenomenal player, having a great postseason, and their pitching staff, I just believe, is a lot better than St. Louis.
Yeah, I just don't want to see St. Louis win this year. Just don't.
Well, you don't want to see how Cool's get another ring
it's
on his
cool
last
if,
season?
It's cool if he gets it because he's done a really good job of mitigating his free agency factor and getting it, and keeping it out of the press. But at the same time, I want to see Texas win. I just do. I think they deserve it after last year.
You know who really wins? The fans. The fans really win in this great historic matchup between these two fantastic
Steve
ball
wins in
clubs.
this because we make him talk about baseball over and over again.
I can't wait till baseball season's over. I would
gonna
rather
talk
talk
about
about the NBA lockout than baseball.
You know what, Steve? Just for that, we will keep talking about baseball even
We're gonna
after
make
the season's
we're gonna
over.
make a Steve's baseball section.
Now time for the off-season baseball section.
Yep, that's right. Jesse and I'm going to talk to Jesse about it tomorrow. Moving on. Bonus pick time here tonight. Which new starting quarterback this week will have the best game in their first appearance as a starter? Carson Palmer for the Raiders, Tim Tebow of the Broncos. Man, I hate saying that. I'm so sick of Tebow. Christian Ponder making his first NFL start for the Vikings, or John Beck starting for the Redskins.
I'm going with Carson Palmer. He's got the most experience out of any of these guys here. I think he's got a better unit around him than any of these guys as well, and so I think he does it well. John Beck, by the way, has not thrown a touchdown pass in his NFL career.
Interesting.
Yeah, 0-4 as a starter.
I think for some reason that Tebow is going to have the best start. I just have this weird vibe, like he was bad, but last time I saw him play, he actually played pretty good. So I think Tebow is going to come in. I just cannot say Carson Palmer. I just don't have enough faith. I think he's going to throw like 4 interceptions, do terrible, and the Raiders are going to be upset.
You know, I want to make Jesse happy. I'm going to go Christian Ponder making his first start for the Vikings. I said that this kid was the second best quarterback coming out of college this last year. Yeah.
Who did you think was number 1?
Jake Locker.
If Jesse was here, he'd be saying future. That's right, Christian Ponder, savior of the Vikings.
Yeah, exactly. Christian Ponder is going to have a good week this week. They might not win.
If he's good enough to keep him in Minnesota, then he'll definitely be the savior.
Although the Vikings may not win this weekend, I think that he has a pretty decent game for the Vikings this weekend. As that is going to do things for us here on Raiders Zone Weekly tonight. We thank you for joining us. We will hope that you will join us tomorrow night as Steve, myself, Ryan Smith.
Go over to Foster Stadium for Board McKinley, right? Is that what we're covering?
No. We'll be staying here on campus and covering Alliance Minerva, big game for the Northeastern Buckeye Conference. And then on Saturday, Vince, Steve, Jesse, and I will be traveling down to Bexley as the Mount Union takes on the Capital Crusaders. Gino pregame show starts at 12:45. Kickoff scheduled for 1:30. We hope you join us, but until then, keep listening to the radio voice of Mount Union, WRMU 91.1.